Seer, our non-stimulant, thermogenic, and recomposition agent. Seer is a super cool product because it's going to help you utilize turning your white adipose tissue, which is for storage of fat, into brown adipose tissue, which is going to help with energy production. So this is great to use for a competition prep or in your weight loss phase. So you can stack it with a stimulant-based thermogenic, or you could also use it in your off-season or muscle building phase to help keep you lean and mean. Seer.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Pro Physique Code. Today we got a fun topic. We are going to talk about when is it time to shut it down, time to end that prep. Maybe your season, you've extended it. Maybe you don't need to extend it. And we'll talk about the circumstances for which we feel, it can be different from athlete to athlete. Evan, Lexie, myself, we've all competed. We've all thought we were going to compete longer and probably thought we were going to compete less and added shows, right? And so we'll talk about when those situations arise. Lexie, this came from a poll you did on your Instagram, correct?
Yeah, I came up with this idea yesterday. I was actually mid-workout, and that's when I feel like I have my creative juices flowing, and I thought of this topic. So I put this up on my story, this topic, and then another topic just to hear what you guys wanted to hear about. And I got a lot of people, I think like over 50 votes that wanted to hear about this topic. So I think it'll be a good one to chat about.
All right. Well, how do we kick it off? How do we start this as far as season ending?
Well, there can just be a couple different reasons why someone ends their season, right? I think glancing or just glossing over those can be helpful. Feedback from a judge saying that you need to be bigger or you need to add muscle, that could be a very good reason to stop it. Hormonal imbalances, like let's say that your food is incredibly low and that your cardio is incredibly high and your body is not responding. That doesn't necessarily mean pull out of the season, but it may need that button here for a little while. Those are two just off the top of my head. That could be very valid reasons outside of obviously, personal ones too, right?
Right. Yeah. I think that's a great one to start with. Like, is judges' feedback. And I think this is going to be very person dependent too on like, what are you looking to get out of your season? Right. So if you do get judges' feedback of, hey, you need to put on muscle, you need to grow, you have to realize you're probably not going to be able to do that, and implement that feedback going into another show. Even if you do take, a little bit of time in between shows, you're not going to put on ample muscle in between shows like that. But I think if you are somebody who, if your goal is not to necessarily win an overall or win your pro card and you're more so just competing for fun, that's one thing. But I think most of the time, most competitors, at least that we work with, are doing this to work their way up, maybe win an overall, win that pro card. So I think if that type of person were to get feedback of like, hey, you're just, too small, you need to take some time to build and grow, that is probably a good idea or a good piece of feedback that just kind of validates that you may need to end your season, earlier than you thought.
Yeah, my personal opinion on when to end a season, there's a few things. First of all, there is this self-awareness, right? Of knowing, even if you've got the potential to do well, but if you just start to feel yourself, struggling with food, struggling with energy, struggling with body image, maybe personal relationships, you gotta, know thyself. And the competitor that I think is the best that I've ever coached at knowing this is Daraja. She's always said to me, I'm done. Like, she's known in her heart when she was ready to be done. Even when we were like on a roll, she'd be like, you know what, I just need a break. And sometimes it's hard, especially, this sport with the attention you get. Most of us get way more attention when we're in prep. We also have way more motivation to post content and show off our physique. And so like, there is this almost like feeling of like, I'm better in prep, but it does just start to wear on your soul, right? The tracking, the being diligent, the not being social, if you start to feel like the gym is becoming a job, no longer something you really enjoy, you got to start paying attention to those things. Because I feel like the longer you delay that end, the pushback can be more severe. Whereas if you pull out a prep at the right time, you can almost cruise right into an improvement season with no negatives. You can just stay leaner, feel better. Yeah, so that for me, we can talk about the NPC, national, and pro level decisions, but for me, like that's the personal know thyself, even know your athlete. You know, we ask our athletes a lot of questions. If we notice their sleep score is terrible, their hunger score is terrible, they're constantly complaining, they're having problems, you know, is sometimes I've had girls literally like a week away from turning pro, and I said, you know what, it's just not your time. We need to stop.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's a great point. And I think I can kind of use an example. So in 2023, I remember after doing the Tampa Pro, I kind of just took a week to think about what I wanted to do after that. If I wanted to continue, like do another show, or if I wanted to wrap up the season. And that was a big thing, like some of the things you just mentioned, Paul. I remember taking that week to really think about things. And I mean, I had arguably been in prep since the beginning of the year. It had just been a really long phase of kind of being in that prep grind. And I know myself, I've, been living this lifestyle for long enough to know when, to kind of have my guard up. And I had noticed that yes, my love for the gym had kind of started to, water down. I was still working out, I was still training, but it just wasn't anything like it normally was. And I think a big thing for me too was just taking pictures all the time, taking those progress pictures, like that was just starting to wear on me, right? Because, when you do peak weeks, you're doing daily check-in pictures, you're, you're taking pictures all the time, right? You're extra critical of yourself. You're looking at yourself all the time. And I remember just thinking, okay, I need a little bit of a break from this. Otherwise, I think if I extend this any longer, I am going to get to that point where I just feel flat out burnt out. And I wanted to save myself from that before I got to that point, because that's not a fun point to be at either, when you feel like you're super burnt out and you don't enjoy going to the gym at all. You don't enjoy the sport. You don't, enjoy all these things that maybe you once enjoyed. So I know that was a big key as to why I just decided, all right, I'm going to go into an improvement season. And it ended up being just a very smooth transition from prep to improvement season because of that decision.
Yeah, I think there's either physical or there's psychological reasons to pull out of prep, right? The physical reasons could be your body not responding, your body being incredibly tired, being injured, like those are all reasons. And then the psychological, the mental part of it, right? Like, I've had to have some conversations with some clients recently that have really, really struggled with binging since they've got close. And if it's here and there sort of thing, it's a different situation. But the last thing we want to do with anyone is create any sort of bad relationship with food in the long run, right? Like that's not worth it. It's not worth it. That part needs to get figured out. And it's about, okay, if this is something that's going to continue happening, maybe we're not in the best spot mentally to continue on with a prep right now. So those are a few other reasons I think too that could be tossed into that mix.
Well, I think so. All of us competed last year, right?
Mhm.
And I think all of us decided not to continue our preps at a certain point. Let's talk about yours, Evan, because you put a lot of effort in, you made a lot of improvements, you got on the pro stage and ultimately decided to do one show.
Mhm.
So let's talk a little bit about your reasons, because I think other people may be able to relate to that as well.
Yeah, look, I talked pretty openly about the end of that prep. I had quite a bit early and tried some stuff, and it kind of backfired on me a little bit there. And I know it wasn't my best package I could have possibly brought on that day, but it was still far improved. And my feedback, and then based on just the eye test, right, is I just need to be bigger. I'm a taller guy, and I need more throughout my chest and my back to be able to stand up there with some of the guys at the pro level. Now, in the back of my mind, I still wanted to probably do another show or two just to bring that fully conditioned, fully peaked, fully nailed look, which I knew would have been improved, and my placings absolutely would have followed that. But would I have been where I wanted to be overall in my places with my curvacy? No, and I knew that. And so it's time to take a step back. It's time to reevaluate and to grow, because my goal isn't just to, if I'm not fighting to be in a first call outs at a bare minimum, then I don't, at this point in my life, I don't see a purpose in stepping on stage yet. So I didn't know if that was going to be the case to where I was physically. And so I decided to pull out and take the time and to grow.
So I'm curious because last year they did not have the weight caps.
Mhm.
Where would you have been last year with the weight and your height?
Pretty under. I have like about 15 pounds I can add
Oh,
because I'm
okay.
tall. Yeah.
Yeah, because I know a lot of those guys are, cutting water at this point to make weight and filling
Yeah.
back out. And sometimes that doesn't go the right way. But, that's what happens when they institute weight caps is people
Mhm.
figure out ways around them in powerlifting and wrestling and body, but any MMA, whatever sport, bodybuilding is no different, especially, with the 212 Olympia and all those guys. Now with classic and men's physique having weight caps, I was just curious. I mean, what was your height and weight?
6'3", and I was 6'3", and my weight was like 216 on
Okay,
stage. I think my weight cap is somewhere around 231, 233, somewhere in that range,
crazy. That is
which is
wild.
big. It is, for everyone's knows, it was the classic physique. They just raised the weight cap this last year, and this is the previous classic physique weight caps. And typically, if you're taller, you got a lot more wiggle room. Big reason Chris Bump said so good in that division compared to someone that's like Terrence Ruffin, that's a little bit on the shorter side of things. He doesn't have as much weight to play
I'm
with.
curious, the guy who won the show at Hurricane that you did, Carlos,
Yeah,
what is it? De Oliveira, De Silva, I forget his name. Kaiki Pro on
Kaiki
Instagram.
Pro, yeah.
Um, I wonder if he would have made the weight cap. He was pretty big
Absolutely not. There's no way you would have made the weight
because he was
cap.
a
I
little
don't know
bit
that for
shorter than you.
sure, but
Yeah.
he is a very large
But he was a
man.
pretty tall guy too. He wasn't like short.
Yeah, he's not short. No, 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 no. He's a very, very, very big dude.
Yeah.
I'll be
And then
interested to see
Lexie,
if
I
he can
think
make it weight.
remembering your season, we did Republic of Texas and Tampa, right? So we got in front of, and this is another indication, get in front of the judges that will tell you if you're ready to go. I had a girl sign up with me recently and she's like, well, I want to compete soon because my qualification runs out. And I said, no, that's not how we do this. If you
No.
can't walk into a show and win at least your class and maybe the overall, there ain't no reason to be going to nationals just because you got your
Right.
qualification.
Right. And I totally agree with that. And I knew I needed more muscle. And I just was like, okay, well, what would be the point in doing another show? I would just be prolonging, or I don't want to say wasting time, but why would I do that when I could just start my improvement season, start growing then and there when I knew that was going to be my feedback and when I knew that that was what I needed to do. So that's kind of how I found, comfort in that decision. And like you said a second ago, a lot of times if you can make those decisions and not just run yourself into the ground mentally and physically, that transition from prep to improvement season is so much smoother. And I felt like that was totally the case. It was, gosh, I feel like there was a little bit of time there where I was like struggling to get my weight to like go up. It was like, it was crazy. So
Yeah.
that transition oftentimes is a lot smoother when you can stop yourself in your season before you get too run down or too tired or just too overworked in general.
Yeah, you brought up a good point about the update pictures. Something we don't think about with prep, but the daily routine of, you know, decision fatigue and like just all the things that go along with, yeah, setting up pictures, posing practice, meal prep to a degree. Now, I think most of us do some type of meal prep year round, so that's not nearly, but then, the degree that which you do it in prep, where everything, every time you travel through an airport, every time you leave the house, thinking ahead, there's almost this, once the prep is over, this freedom of like, oh man, I don't have to wake up early and take pictures. I don't have to, weigh myself every day if I don't want to. I don't have to pose twice a day. When that starts to sound more kind of enticing to you, start paying attention to that stuff.
Mhm.
These are, and this is something else I'll say. Do not let a coach push you to competing because you feel like you're going to let them down. I've had clients tell me that, oh, I don't want to let you down. I'm like, you cannot, that's impossible to let me down. The only thing you can do to let me down is not tell me how you're really feeling. Because I do feel like some coaches push their athletes to be at shows just because it looks good on them to have multiple athletes at a show, or, maybe they're going to be at the show and they want you there. That's not a reason to compete. You got to be in it for you.
No, and I don't know. I'm curious to hear from you guys too, because I don't know if this is just like a female thing, but I feel like this is a really big thing for, and this was a really big thing at the end of my last prep was, but I feel like whenever I take progress pictures deep into prep, you're taking them every day. I always find that I overanalyze them. Like I'll take them and then I'll look at them and I like them at first. And then I'm like, oh wait, no, I could do this better. Let me retake them. And I find that I tend to fall into that pattern of like self-sabotage and just getting those like fuzzy goggles and not seeing myself clearly and just picking every little thing apart. And that becomes very, very exhausting mentally. So I'm curious if that's a female thing or if you guys experience that too, like when you take your own progress pictures.
That's an every person thing. If you
Yeah. I think the leaner you get, I always say the leaner you get, the more critical you become. When you're not in prep, you appreciate, you're like, oh, I look pretty good. And when you're in prep, you only see your flaws, or like you see your flaws much more visibly. You start to notice the lower back, the glute hamstring tie-in. You don't notice the new chest striation. You notice the lack of a glute striation, right? So you starting to like, you know, for men, it's definitely a competitor thing. I think we start to focus on what's not there versus what is there.
Now, there's one thing I want to touch on with this, and I agree. Like when you don't want it to get to a point to where it just ruins every aspect of your life. But if you're a newer competitor on things and you think that you're going to be excited throughout the whole process, and you think you're going to be excited to take pictures, and you think that you're going to wake up feeling great and you're going to be motivated, that's absolutely not going to be the case. If that is the case, you're not going to be ready or lean. That's also part of it. We're all going to go through parts of prep to where we don't want to do things, or we don't want to pack and bring our food, or we don't want to weigh ourselves, to where we don't want to take progress pictures, or we don't want to do the cardio. That's part of it. If you don't question why you're doing this at some point in a prep, then the chances of you being fully conditioned is probably pretty much on the lower side of things. Because when things get hard, things get amplified. When food is low, everything becomes amplified, right? Everything does. So your fuse gets a little bit shorter. Your sleep's not going to be quite as good because, a lot of times we're feeling a little bit hungry, right? And anxiety gets in there too. So the sleep won't necessarily be as good, which means we're not going to have as much energy the next day. And it's taking all this kind of stuff into account. But if it compounds over time, then yes, it's something that you need to address. And honestly, it's something that you should absolutely bring up with your coach. If you have these thoughts, please bring it up to a coach. And I can tell you, I've had girls pull out of prep. I've had girls that have a lot of talent, that want to go very far in a sport initially, and then it's their first show, and then to the show, and they already decide, hey, I don't think this is going to be for me, sort of thing with it, because they don't realize how much time it kind of ends up evolving, right, and taking into it. And especially if they're type A personalities and they want to be on top of everything with it, and you have life on top of that, it can really start to pile up. So it's about trying to find that kind of balance on things with it. And a lot of times, if it gets too much and you're earlier on your competing career, it may be good to just take a step back. And that doesn't even need to be pulled out of the whole season, right? Like if, depending on kind of where you are with it, but you can pull out of prep.
Yeah.
It's not the end of the world.
Yeah. Pulling out of prep all it really means is you're getting rid of that lingering show date, right? Like, for most of us that we do this year round, to some degree, you're just essentially pulling out of prep doesn't mean you're going to stop living the lifestyle, doesn't mean you're going to stop being an athlete or a competitor. You're getting rid of that lingering show date and, ahead, and just focusing on, growing or whatever your goal is. And I also think another important thing is if you are considering, let's say you've done a show, you're in the midst of your season, and maybe you had plans to do another show or another couple shows. I always recommend, if you are kind of going back and forth between, maybe calling your season or not, think about it for at least, I would say, like a week before you make that decision. Because if you're deep into prep, I think we all know we can't always think logically and like rationally. So if you just make that decision like on the day that it comes to you, you may regret it, the next day or even the week later. So that's why I think it's important to talk with your coach, but also take like a good couple of days, take at least a good week to just think about it before you actually make a decision that you could potentially regret, because we all have tough days in prep, and it's easy to have like that one or maybe two really tough days in prep where you are just pushing, and you may decide on those days, you know what, nope, I don't want to do my show. And then the next week you may completely regret it. So take like a good week to really think about it before calling that decision.
Well, and honestly, that may completely change how you feel. I think so one thing that I very much remember about my first prep was, it wasn't the cardio, it wasn't the diet. For me, it was constantly seeing the scale go down, noticing my performance in the gym was suffering at time to time. And then the comments of people being like, oh, you're looking skinny, right?
Yeah.
Because I was still going to work in my normal work clothes and my face was thinner. They didn't see me at the gym with the tank top on where I looked freaky good. So that stuff started to wear on me. And I started to realize, and at my coach at the time was Lane Norton. And I just remember he said to me, he's like, you have to change your mindset, because no longer are we in the mindset of like trying to obtain muscle. We're trying to keep it, but we are trying to be the most shredded human at your show. And when he said that, I thought, okay, now I can do this, because now I knew what I had to do. But for a while, the mental game was starting to really like, why am I doing this? Because there's days when you are not quite stage lean and you are low carb and you are depleted and you look like you just started lifting and you're like, what is going on here? Right. And then
Yep.
a magic of a refeed day and a recovery day, and you're like, holy crap, I look like I could win the Olympia. Like your mind starts to mess with you way more than the body or the diet or the, like, we can endure. And I've seen girls on plans of 700 calories and all protein, and they can endure whatever. But the psychology of prep is really the struggle. And then once you get over that hurdle and you get closer to stage lean, then every day becomes exciting. I mean, every pound you drop is a completely new physique. Every time you do a high carb day, you see new detail. And so it almost becomes exciting when you've experienced it before. When you know you're in the tough part of prep,
Yeah.
but you're about to be through it, you start to look forward to what's next.
I call it the skinny fat stage. It's
Yeah.
pretty much what you
I call
feel,
it the
right?
doldrums. I call it the doldrums
Yeah.
of prep, because you're not lean enough where people are like excited to see you, but you've lost enough body fat where you just don't look like yourself. So you're like
Yep.
in that mediocre phase.
And that's something a lot of newer competitors struggle with too. And I think we can all probably attest to working with people that have thought this, that start prep in a little bit heavier size. And then when the weight starts dropping and they in that kind of middle ground to where they're worried, they're like, I feel just skinny. I don't feel good. Like I feel skinny. I feel like I'm losing all my muscle. And it's like, it's not any of that. It's the fact we're having to push to get body fat off. And when you push to get body fat off, your cortisol is going to raise, which is going to make you look a little bit inflamed. Your glycogen's not going to be there. Your energy is not going to be there. Your training is not going to be good. Your pumps aren't going to be as good. And yeah, it's a crappy phase of it. But once you start to understand this is a needed phase to get to where we want to go, just like hunger, don't fight it. Don't fight that phase of feeling and looking like that, because you have to go through it. If you want to look good, cool. You're not going to look good on stage. You won't. And just like if you want to go through prep, look, there's some people that don't get hungry, but the vast majority of people do. And if you try to fight that, then again, you're not going to get the results that you want to. These are all things you have to go through.
Evan, it
to get
might
to
be a
where you wanna
learned
be.
behavior, but if I'm not hungry, I worry. Like at the end of prep, like if I haven't eaten in a couple hours and I'm not hungry, I'm like, something's wrong. I ate
Yeah.
too
Yeah.
much, or I didn't track right. Like I associate hunger with progress, but
Mhm.
of course that could be learned from prep,
I think it's probably part of that too. I do when people's hunger drops, and this has happened to me in prep too. And look, we all go through stages and days, right? So you could talk about when to pull out of prep. I think if you have a day here or there, it's absolutely not a reason. If you run off like 7, 8, 9 days in a row to where you feel horrible and to where you have no energy, then that's probably not the best sign. And I kind of look at that like hunger too. If you have a day that's not really hungry, that's cool. But if you have a bunch of days you aren't hungry and necessarily the scale might not be progressing quite as much either with that, then there's probably something going on, and it's probably something to do with your digestion with that. Because if you're digesting food and you're in a deficit and your output is high, you should be needing something.
It's one of
And
the most common complaints I get with my clients on refeeds is like, I was fine all week and then I had my
the
refeeds
refeed.
and now I'm starving. And I'm like, yeah, that's a good thing.
A
Yeah,
good
and
sign.
that's a big thing I look for too, is especially further on in prep. If we give refeeds and the hunger doesn't spike the next day, that's
Or
information I
even
need to
during,
know.
even that's one thing I noticed about myself in prep. Like I become ravenous about halfway
Yeah,
through a refeed day where I have to like start to control my hunger.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, well, I think we should also touch on, so we touched briefly on if you compete and you get feedback that you need to just put on muscle. We talked a little bit about how that can be indicative of like just going into an off season or cutting your season shorter. But I think we can also talk about the flip side. If you get feedback that you need to be significantly leaner, because I think sometimes it seems like, oh, that's an easy fix, right? Just come down a couple of pounds before the next show. However, for some people, that is an easier fix. But if you are somebody who had to push really, really hard in prep and you go into that show, maybe your food was very low, your cardio was super high, your body was just not really responding a lot towards the tail end of prep, and you're still getting feedback of, hey, you need to come down maybe 4 or 5 pounds. That can also, I think, be another area where, could you continue to try to push and go into the next show? Absolutely. But if your body is already showing signs of just like being tired, fatigued, not responding, that also may indicate that you may want to, go pull, or not pull out of prep, but, bring your food up and go into a reverse diet instead.
No, I mean, yeah, I mean, that's completely the case. And
Well,
I've worked with some.
I think this is where it gets tricky. Evan, you and I both know this. Lexie, even you know this. Getting feedback from a judge that you're not muscular enough, sometimes it means you need to be leaner and you look more muscular, right?
Mhm.
And so that's where it becomes, okay, how well do you understand your client's body? Could you be leaner and look better? So I'll give Stephanie Ortiz, she turned pro at Universe this year, and she did junior nationals, and her feedback was, you need more size. And she's like, well, what do we do, coach? We only have a couple weeks till Universe. I said, we're going to come down 2 or 3 pounds and I'm going to feed you a burger and 300 carbs the night before the show. So you're going to be leaner and fuller. And she ended up getting her pro card because she looked like, shrunk wrapped, and she was really popping on stage. And she has the structure where she looks more muscular than she is, right? So she won class B at about 104 pounds. And I think she was like 106 at junior nationals. So did she get more muscular by losing 3 pounds? Nope. But bodybuilding is an illusion. And there is, and this is one thing that I think is one of my great advantages as a coach. If you're not absolutely the most shredded you can be, you'll probably can still look better.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
that's understanding your athlete, understanding the feedback from the judges. A lot of judges, if they ever competed, it was a long time ago, they might not have taken a good approach. They don't understand the process. They understand what they see on stage, and they're trying to tell you what they want. But sometimes you got to show the judges what they want to see, and then they'll go, that's the look, right?
Mhm.
And then you go, okay, well, you told me not to be any leaner. We're 4 pounds leaner than the last time you saw me. And they'll be like, oh, okay. So I just didn't, because they also are afraid of the competitor that comes in too shredded, especially in the bikini.
Right. And that's a
He
great
loves
point.
to say like, just a little bit leaner.
A little bit lean, a little bit
And
tighter.
I'll be like, that's 6 pounds for you.
Yeah, 6, 7 pounds. Sorry. Yeah. Well, she said just a little bit leaner. I'm like, well, little
Yes,
bit. Yeah.
just a little bit leaner.
We've had
But
those.
as a coach, you get that eye for, we call it the naked eye test, but that it's impossible to take your eye off the person who is the most shredded on stage. And you might be more shredded than the division demands, but sometimes you'd rather be there than be slightly soft. It depends on the physique.
Now, here's a good example of that, Paul. So when I made my pro debut at Tampa, I was 220 pounds on stage. I was around 215, 216 at this show. So 4 to 5 pounds lighter at this last show I did a year later with considerably more muscle. So I looked like I was far bigger, but my weight was down with that. And that was with the digestive issues on top of that, right? So I probably would end up being like around, 213 pounds on stage, full.
Right.
That'd have been 7 pounds lighter than my pro debut, and I have more muscle now. So it is that illusion. It's about trying to make sure that you come down and be able to fill up correctly with that. And yeah.
And that's kind of what we talked about, Evan, too. Was it, I think 2 weeks ago in our podcast about interpreting the judges' feedback, about how, you hear these different things, and it really does come down to, as coaches, like knowing your athlete, right? And interpreting the feedback that way.
Yeah. And to kind of piggyback off what you were saying, Lexie, about, being leaner, if you need to be leaner, like what goes into getting leaner with that. And, you know, I've worked with a few girls that came from not the best situations, right? And trying to get them ready for a show and them wanting to continue because they put so much time into that prep, which I fully understand. But then it kind of gets to the point of, is that juice worth the squeeze? Are we able to get that down there and get you to where we need to go with you in all being healthy at the end? Right.
Right.
And that's where the conversation comes of, okay, we probably need to pull out of this. And then that's a very hard conversation to have because people, they're willing to do anything to get to where they need to go with that. And they've worked so hard. Some of these people, 8, 9, 10 months, they've been on this prep, right? Trying to get to that fully lean condition. But it's unfortunately, it's not going to happen.
Well, let's
And then
talk a little
telling
bit
you,
about
cool,
the
we need
other
to
side
pull
of the
out of
sport,
this.
because there are other things you can do. Let's say you get to stage and the feedback, and you are as conditioned as can be, you
Mhm.
are as full as can be, peaked, right? And the feedback is, we want a little more muscle on you. There is the other side of the equation, and I've done this in the last couple of years, especially as my eyes have been open to, you know, including some performance enhancing drugs for athletes. There are some substances out there that are wildly beneficial for adding lean body mass without any negative consequences, right? What I would consider, you know, detrimental feminine responses, you know, lowering of the voice and things like that. So I've also had girls that were told, you're not big enough, and 8 weeks later turn pro because we just added something to the equation, you know. And I think that'll lead into our next topic for this podcast. But, you know, that's a side of the sport that I think it's becoming a little bit more open for discussion. It used to be very cloak and dagger, you know, everybody
Yeah.
knows a guy at the gym that's selling something out of their trunk. Now, with hormone therapy clinics, with blood work, we can actually look under the hood and go, oh, well, yeah, here's the problem. If we make one minor change, you might, I've seen some girls respond very well to very minimal dosages.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the same thing can be said on the other side of that too, Paul, with when you got people that bodies stop responding to things. A lot of it can be because they've been habitually dieted so long. So if you start,
Yeah.
you know, they work with a good professional and they look at their blood work and they find out their TT is downregulated, right? And supplementing that can be a helpful thing at certain points with certain people. I'm not necessarily a big fan of that. I think probably getting out of that's the smartest way and getting your body back to equilibrium before you start messing with too much of that things. But typically, yes, yeah, there's things you can do and you can do them safely.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's transition. I think we've kind of covered this topic, right? Like, when's the time to pull out a prep? I mean, it probably comes back to what your end goal is. I've had people that stayed in prep too long, but they actually thrive in prep. They actually struggle out of prep. They don't struggle. They struggle with the goal, with not having a goal. So I'll actually Jedi mind trick them and be like, yeah, we're still in prep, but I'm not putting them on stage. I'm just reversing them or whatever. But to me, that's the ultimate decider, is what is your end goal? And is this next show going to benefit you in that regard? I've had many girls that were like one spot off their pro card at nationals, and they just 8 more weeks, let's do one more, and 4 more, and you start chasing, versus, what Maria Nemeth did last year. She got second at North Americans in 2022, did not compete again at a national show until 2023 at Universe, and turned pro. So after getting second, you think, oh, let's just do the next one. Well, the next one after North Americans was nationals in December. So you had September, October, November, right? Didn't make sense. So there is an element of, like, knowing what your athlete can handle throughout a season. So I think we're pretty good on knowing if you should continue.
I think, and
Yeah.
like one last little minor point, which I feel like this is kind of an obvious one, but I think for some people it isn't, is finances too. So, don't put yourself in debt by just doing show after show after show. If you do 2 shows and you get, second place, and you're like, oh, I really want to push for that first place, but that your finances are not there. I would not just, I would not keep going, I think so. It is important to recognize that, because I know some people have that thought of like, oh, okay, let me just keep going and going and going. I'm so close. But, you don't want to put yourself in that perpetual state of stress too, with finances that you're going to have to deal with after the season wraps up. So that's something to consider too.
Well, I didn't even talk about me last year. The reason I stopped competing, because my goal was to do a national show, because I had turned 45 last year and I thought, cool, this is my opportunity. I'm going to go in the 45 division. I ended up doing the show in Miami in June. My original goal was like, maybe I'll do March, April. I kept pushing it back until I felt ready. I did the show in June. And then for me personally, I realized that what I had going on outside of the stage was more important than my own personal goal to get on stage. Also, I looked at the schedule for the Masters Nationals and I had to be there on a Wednesday for men's physique. And that really was like, golly, so I'm going to be flying up on Tuesday to do the show on Wednesday. Then I got to be there Thursday and Friday because my girls compete on Saturday. I'm like, I'm really taking like 5 days out of my life to like do a national show. It did not matter enough to me. My life will be impacted zero. No one's going to be like, oh my gosh, did you hear Paul Ravella's an IFBB pro? No one will care about that, right? So it's just a personal thing that I want to do someday. And it just made no sense for me to do another show. I was happy with how the first show went, got it out of my system, and I transitioned. And this has been my best improvement season. I have never stayed this lean, this muscular post show. Like this is and I think that is correlated with that. I did the show and then I just cruised. And I had it in the back of my mind, maybe I'll do one more, but I just kept delaying it to the point I didn't. And then I also did not drink alcohol for an entire year.
I remember that. No, I mean,
Yeah.
I have to say, Paul, like you literally are, you still are so lean. And so I could see how you had like such a good improvement season. Cause I even saw, was it, you were in, where were you a couple weeks ago on vacation, North Carolina?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cause I was seeing some things you were posting there and I'm like, oh my gosh, it almost looks like he's in prep. Like you have definitely
There
made.
are days where if I don't add some food to my diet where I'm like, oh man, I'm, cause I'm under 220. I'm like,
Yeah.
some days I'm 218. So like, yeah, part of me is like, man, I could get on stage real soon, but no, I turn 50 in a couple of years. That'll be my next, but a lot of it is like, what is going on outside of the sport for you? Like we all do the sport for a different reason.
Mhm.
I do it just because I freaking love it. In fact, I don't even think I told anybody I was in prep that wasn't in my
You did.
personal life.
I remember I knew that you were going to do the show a couple weeks out, but up until then, I didn't even know you were in prep. So yeah, which honestly, that's something I'm kind of considering like next time is maybe just not putting it out
Yeah.
there. I don't know. I feel like it just takes a little bit of pressure off of your plate, but
Yep.
obviously there comes a certain point that I think people start to kind of catch on like, they're looking pretty lean, right?
Yeah.
Diet pace. Yep. Diet pace. That's a big one. But I don't know. We'll see.
Look, it matters what you want to get out of it, right? If you're using it for business or social media or something like that, you obviously want to do it. But if it's going to impact you in a negative way, then maybe not.
Right.
There's no rules.
Yeah.
So let's transition a little bit and talk about, because before the podcast started, we had a discussion about the Ben Weider this year. For those that aren't familiar, the Ben Weider is in November. Prior to COVID, it was an international show in Montreal. And for that reason, it had a pro show and pro cards attached for all the overall winners. So if you win the bikini overall, you get a pro card. If you win the men's physique overall, you get a pro card, etc. They also have all the pro divisions, which also include an Olympia qualification. The difference with the Ben Weider is it's drug tested. So that means it's a different set of rules. And most of the drug testing rules, I believe they're WADA compliant, are around performance enhancing things like steroids, like diuretics, obviously Anavar's off the list, Winstrol's off the, whatever you're taking. If it isn't over the counter, you can't do that show. And so what the league has done, and I think it's probably a reflection of the popularity of the Ben Weider, because they moved it to the United States because of COVID. However, they kept the international rules. It is still a pro qualifier and it is still an Olympia qualifier. So it's kind of unique in that. And so 3 years ago, Lana Dunbar turned pro there. Immediately, the next year was at the Olympia. 2 years ago, Brittany Schulman, my client, won the overall there. The next year, she qualified for the Olympia. So this show is not won by just anybody, right? The girls that do well there are doing well at the pro league. So they've changed the rules. You cannot now do the Ben Weider, which you used to be able to do if you were just nationally qualified with a top 2 placing at a regional show. Now, Evan, why don't you read the rule from the website? You have it up still?
I did. I can click on it. Give me a second. I'll pull it back up.
Well, I just think I want to notify you guys, because I think what might happen is people that are planning to do the Ben Weider, They might go to like the Iowa Classic and win the overall and be like, cool,
Yep.
I won the Iowa Classic overall. You're not
I got it right
qualified for
here.
the Ben Weider now.
For NPC USA athletes, you must have competed in an NPC USA natural regional event in 2024 or 2023 or 2024. So there's a 2-year qualification window, but it has to be a natural show.
And the other caveat there is they didn't say anything about placing.
Nope.
You just got to show up and compete. So what that tells me they're trying to do is create a funnel for a Ben Weider type show where it becomes national level size. What I'm curious about, because right now they're only awarding pro cards for the overall winners, but if you get 100 bikini girls, you need to give out 2 or 4 pro cards. You know, the year Lana won it, I would say there was probably 30. And the year Brittany won it, probably 40. You know, it kind of went up a little bit there. But I think last year it really got big. I noticed the numbers in the NPC bikini were real big. And I think I had 2 girls in the overall, but did not win it. But Brittany won the pro show and got the Olympic qualification. So that was way more exciting for me. But I think that's kind of what I see they're doing. They're building the foundations for a natural league within the NPC and IFBB. They've even announced a second Ben Weider show that will be happening in the spring.
Yeah. I think that's really neat. I feel like I've gotten some questions from some of my own clients about just this kind of new realm of like these more natural shows and if I think they're going to continue to grow and I honestly I feel like this year is definitely the first year that they've had all these opportunities for natural only shows, but I think I don't know about you guys, and Paul, you probably have a better answer to this, but I would assume that it probably has a lot to do with the turnout and, you know, are the promoters able to make enough money off of the shows to keep putting them on? That's what I would guess. Like that will be a big driver as to if they
Well, there's 2 ways to do it. So either you have an established natural show for years, like Dave Lieberman in Ohio has the Natural Ohio, which is like they get 300-400 athletes every year, if I'm not mistaken. You know, but Dave's been putting on that show for maybe 20-30 years. You know, it's been around forever. The other thing you can do is you offer a natural show at an NPC show. So Tim Gardner last year had the Atlantic Coast Championships, NPC. And then on Sunday, he had the natural Atlantic Coast. So you signed up to compete at 2 shows, one on Saturday, one on Sunday. If you do the natural show, you have to follow the drug testing standards. But that way, the promoter's not necessarily just putting on a natural show and hoping for the best. But I think there is obviously still a large group of people that love to compete in natural bodybuilding. The natural bodybuilding leagues do very well, especially the more established ones. So it's there. And I think this is just an example of the NPC and the IFBB paying attention to what people want. They want to compete on a level playing field. That's why we have masters. That's why we have novice, because novices want to compete against other novices and masters want to compete against other masters. So when you create this, like, you know, when you get what you want and you go compete at these shows, it just shows the promoters, okay, this is what we should be doing.
If I had suggestions for anyone in the NPC on how to handle this, if this is just my opinion on there, is I wouldn't say add a division to the regular NPC show. I would probably think maybe get rid of either the novice or the true novice and then just slide in the natural division into the exact same show. So it's not on an entirely separate day.
Well, you know, they have like the military or
yeah.
So that's what you could do. You could keep the novice and the true novice, and then they could just sign up for the drug tested category, come out for that class. Yeah, absolutely. That'd be one way to do it.
And then the other thing I would say is make sure there's accountability around the drug testing part of it. Make sure that is hammered home, because unlike the other organizations, which are purely natural organizations, the NPC is not that. So there will be people that worry you got some cheaters and liars trying to come over and say they're natural and they're not. And there were some cases at that last year with the Ben Weider with some wellness girls. I know because we saw that and we saw their cycles they talked about. They were not natural at all. So granted that person pulled out of the show, but we want to make sure that that the natural portion of that is protected, that the winners are absolutely fully drug tested, that their results are public. However you want to do that is totally. And I would even go as far as what some of these organizations do is when people fail their drug tests, they just put their name as like a lifetime ban list and why on there, like almost like a public shaming of that.
don't.
And
Yeah,
look,
I don't know
if you
that they
do
would do that.
if you
The
do
standards,
PEDs and you go into a natural show, you got more problems and questions about.
Yeah.
You need to do some soul searching.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because you have an option. If you want to compete and not and take stuff, you have an option.
Yes.
Natural athletes in a lot of cases don't have an option. So yeah, you are kind of, I mean, not kind of, you're just not really a good person. There's no reason for you to do that.
Yeah, I agree with you, Evan. I think that the regulations around the testing there needs to be a really good, solid approach to that. Because I do remember exactly what you were talking about. There was a lot that came out last year of certain competitors that were, claiming to be natural going into Ben Veeder and supposedly weren't. So I think that as long as they have the proper regulations and drug testing available, I think it could potentially be a really good thing.
Yeah, and it needs to be very clear about that process. Very clear. You win, you get drug tested. This is exactly what we test for. It all needs to be out front and center. There needs to be no questions.
And my preference would be if they did something prior to the competition, because there is something to be said for, you go through the show, you give the overall award out. A couple weeks later, we find out that the overall winner didn't win. They contact the person in the overall that they gave second to and say, hey, you won. But they still lost that moment on stage.
Yes.
I never get that back. I've seen this happen before because I used to coach exclusively in natural bodybuilding. So what they do at natural bodybuilding shows is they polygraph everybody before the show. And it's not necessarily that the polygraph is going to catch everybody, but it's going to make people nervous. I was a lifetime natural and I was nervous as crap every time because it just hit me like, oh man, if this test goes wrong, I can't even do the show after all this months of work. So I don't think people are going to risk going into a polygraph as a liar when they've been prepping for months, right? I just don't, I don't see that happening. So they haven't instituted that part of it yet, but that's the added layer that they do at the natural level. And my client, Brian DaCosta, who won WNBF Worlds last year, he just got randomly drug tested by his organization. They called him up, said, we're coming, you're taking a drug test. He took it.
Really?
Yeah.
Cool.
So that's the next level, right? But it just comes down to the rules.
Yeah, it all comes down to the rules, right? Like it's what is natural. And then we could go down the whole rabbit hole. Is it lifetime natural? Is it natural the time you step on stage? Like there's all kind of rules and thoughts you can really kind of go to.
All the natural bodybuilding organizations that I was associated with was 7 years or more natural.
Okay.
So that's what the polygraph helped with, because blood test, urine, that ain't going to test nothing but the last little bit of time, right?
Yeah.
But a polygraph, you can say, in the last 7 years, have you knowingly taken an anabolic steroid? And your heartbeat, if you're a liar, they're going to notice that. So like, that's the only way to really dictate the timeline.
Well,
I think that's
another thing too to consider. I feel like, this has become a lot more prevalent within the past couple of years, is going to be like hormone replacement therapy. Because I know a lot of people are kind of like undecided with, is that natural? Is that not?
It is not natural. It is not. And here's why. There's a place for you to compete if you're on hormones.
Yeah.
So the natural bodybuilding organizations, they still do not recognize HRT because that can be just used as a cover up. And honestly, like, listen, in natural bodybuilding, your hormones drop in prep. An HRT doctor is going to prescribe you something based on your levels at the end of prep. So you are augmenting your own body composition.
Yeah.
So
even if you are on TRT to get you back to a natural level,
doesn't matter.
You can be on prep as a guy, go in, and let's say that the natural levels are whatever they say, 300 to 900, right? And let's say before you start prep as a natural athlete, you're at 750 or 900 or 1,000 even. At the end of prep, you're going to be probably 100 to 200 at the highest. Now, if you're on TRT, guess what? You're still going to be at that 900 to 1,000. So you do have an advantage. Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
And like I said, there's really no way to test like levels. So
Right.
Yeah,
if you're
I
going to
mean,
do,
you can test per deciliter on there, but it's not
oh no,
going to
no, I
make the
meant like
difference.
for the athletes at the shows, like that's going to be splitting hairs. So now they're going to decide the winner based on what your test levels are. No, it's
And
just,
the range is so huge naturally anyways, it's impossible.
yeah,
It's not a fair way to do it.
right now it's very clear. If you require TRT, great. There's a whole organization for you that you can compete in where they don't care what you need to take. So as of yet, the natural bodybuilding competitions have opted to just say, like, if you require TRT, even if it's a doctor to keep you healthy, we're just not dealing with that.
I love the idea of the NPC doing this. I think it's very smart. I think the transparency in this division, because I have some athletes that obviously do natural organizations. Some are better than others. Some are more transparent than others. The way the NPC has been recently, with Tyler and everyone going out there and giving all that information on why people are winning and why people are not, I think is incredibly beneficial. I think this is super, super smart for them to do. They just need to make sure that the credibility is there to back it. However they want to go about that, if this can be a credible place for people to compete and know they're competing against other natural people, it will be huge. If it can be credible and if they can prove it's credible and if they can put everything out there to show everyone that they're doing everything to keep the bad apples out.
Yeah, I mean, I think what it'll do, it'll draw in some. So a couple of years ago, when they instituted the classic physique division, what I noticed was a lot of the top world natural bodybuilding competitors that had been winning world titles and stuff, but it always been like, I kind of want to know what the IFBB is about. The one I remember was Cleveland Thomas, who had won multiple world titles in the natural world, came over, got his pro card at nationals in classic physique, and then qualified for the Olympia, right? So natural guys can, at the top of the natural bodybuilding world, can easily transition. They are genetic anomalies. They can transition into some of those divisions and do well. And obviously, so can the women. I mean, especially the bikini division. You don't need to be on drugs to be a top level bikini competitor if you have good genetics or maybe great genetics, whatever you want to call it. But so I think what it'll do, it'll entice some of those athletes that have been competing in the natural league to go, you know what? I wonder what I can do over here. Let me go see.
Yeah,
I love it. I love that idea of it.
I do too.
So yeah, we'll probably do a follow-up podcast once they announce the spring one. But for now, just be aware, if you want to do the Ben Weider, get your butt on a natural stage, because you don't want to be 3 weeks out and realize you're not even allowed to do it.
Ooh,
Yep. And
yeah.
if you guys need to know what the natural shows are with that, we were talking about this earlier. You can literally just Google 2024 NPC natural contests, and there is a list that pops up, and there is way more than you would think.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. Anything else for the code?
I don't think so. I guess if you're listening, we will all see you guys in a couple weeks in Texas at the Texas Pro, which I'm super excited for, and then Tampa Pro the week before.
Sold out.
I know. I feel bad. I'm like, oh, I'm excited for the seminar, but sorry if you're listening and you haven't gotten tickets because it is sold out, but we'll all be there on Saturday at the show. So we'll have a booth as well.
Yeah.
And then the week before that. So I don't know the exact date. Is it August like 2nd or 3rd is the Tampa Pro? And I know we'll all be.
Well, Tampa Pro is weird because it starts on Thursday night. So I have a
Thursday.
Masters Pro. She goes on the 1st. And then the 2nd is like a lot of the pro men's 212 and
Men's physique.
figure. And yeah. And then Saturday is the more, the bikini division. That's really what I pay attention to. And then the NPC show. So yeah.
Classic physique and men's physique and figure and 212, I believe, are on Friday.
It's always weird because I show up Friday afternoon for like athlete check-ins and I see people walking around with trophies and I'm well, it's weird. They're already done.
It is. Yeah. I feel like the best way to explain Tampa Pro is it's not like just a show. It's an entire event. Like it's 3 days long. There's booths, there's vendors, it's a fun show. It's fun.
I mean, it's a long weekend. Last year, me and Evan had the fortune to be the last people at the show because his girl won true novice overall. My girl won open overall. And I had the 2nd place in the pro. So we almost swept the whole bikini show, but we were there till 10, 11 at night.
It is always just a very late show. Well, I feel like last year was the first year they did the judging was a little, well, not judging, but it was a little different because at pre-judging for the NPC show, nobody
No
did
routines.
routines. So I feel like that is, I mean, it's always been a show that gets over really late, but I feel like that made it extra late last year.
They did all the routines at finals. Yeah.
Right. So this year looks like Tyler and Bill, I think they
Tyler and
announced
Steve on the flyer.
Oh, I thought it was Bill. Okay, I
Steve
know
Weinberger.
Tyler.
Usually
Really?
So
Steve Weinberger's there when they have things like open bodybuilding. Like
okay.
Steve is like the guy for open bodybuilding. And I feel like, I don't know who's going to be doing this show, but there's usually some rock stars that show up.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see who comes out on that list. There's a lot of people who have not competed yet that need to qualify.
Well,
for Olympia.
Andrew
A lot of
Jack
open
is
guys.
supposed to do Texas. I'm like, what if he just shows up for Tampa? That'd be awesome. So come on, bro, just do it. Just make me happy.
You know, one of my funny memory I have is Tampa Pro was in 2020. I remember it was like one of the first shows that like kind of happened post COVID, like where you could come and spectate. And I vividly remember going, and in the ballroom, like all the chairs were like spaced apart. It was so weird, but I remember
They made us, remember they made us stand outside, like to line up. You had to be on the back.
Yeah. Yep. It was weird time for sure, but
The fire marshal tried to shut the show down because there was too many people in there. I remember like Tim was freaking out that day.
Oh yes, the COVID. Yep, I remember all that. Yeah.
Yep. The masks, the seats like a couple feet apart. Yep. It was a wild time.
That's when I found out, because I was doing North Americans like a month after that. We found out I was going to be outside under a tent and all that. I remember those times.
Crazy.
Alex Toplin won that overall at that North Americans.
That's when he won that year?
Yep, that's when I met Alex. Yep. We were in the same class. He was right next to me in the first call out, and I was like, well, this sucks. This is unfortunate.
He looks good this year. I'll be curious. I think he's going to do another show before the Olympia. He looks good.
Yeah.
Do we have any shows this upcoming weekend? Pro shows?
Well, I'm not going to any this weekend, and USA's is this weekend. I have a girl doing USA's.
Oh, duh. Yes.
And
USA.
But it's in Anaheim, and bikini is on Friday. The nice thing that they did with USA's this year, they made it a one-day show.
Yes.
Finally. So maybe I'll go back next year. I've kind of, for two reasons. The West Coast is just so hard on me, flying all the way out there, flying all the way back. It takes me like 2 days to get back to normal, which is maybe because I'm 48, maybe just because I'm stuck in my ways.
No, I'm the same way. That time zone changes. It's a lot.
Going there is fine. I feel great. It's literally when I get home on Sunday, and I feel like it takes me. And then also they've been doing it for 2 days. So like I've cleaned up at that show. I've had a girl turn pro at that show every year for the last couple of years. Last year I had 2. So it's like I do well at that show, but it's also like I just can't justify going all the way back out there, coming all the way back to Tampa, going all the way back out to Texas, all the way to Nashville. It's like if I stay East Coast-ish, I can go to a show every weekend, no problem. That West Coast wrecks me. So
it's hard.
It is hard. Well, I guess that's what we got today. We are good.
Great success. Thank you for listening to the Pro Physique Code. Please leave us a comment, a review. Go make us seem good on the internet somehow. We'd appreciate it.
Great success.
All right, guys.
Thanks for listening, guys.